to understand if there's a root, a mode of being, let's say, that takes us away from undue suffering, but more than that, takes us away from undue suffering multiplied by malevolence. It's a fundamental existential problem of life. We all suffer. That's the meaning of life. We all suffer. The suffering is exacerbated by the malevolence in our hearts and the malevolence in the hearts of all of us. And the paramount issue that faces us is what to do about that. And the answer is, I think, live a life that manifests itself as meaningful. Because it seems to me that the meaning isn't a rational phenomenon. It's not something that you create. This is where Nietzsche, I think, got it wrong. He believed that as a consequence of the death of God, we would have to create our own values. We would have to become gods ourselves, so to speak. But I don't think that Nietzsche was right, because I don't think that we can create our own values. I think that we have to discover them. And I think that what we discover are eternal values. And I think that the eternal values that are discoverable are precisely the values that lead us away from the pathway to perdition that was characterized by places such as Auschwitz. And I also think that we all know this. Now, it's not that we can't question it, because we can question it. But the questioning is, in some sense, beside the point, like the person objecting to the grandeur of Beethoven's Ninth by pointing out that it's going to end. The questioning is beside the point. It's missing the point. I've studied a variety of great psychologists, Jean Piaget and Carl Jung and Freud and Carl Rogers, many of the great 20th century clinicians. And my sense is that, along with the biologists and the evolutionary psychologists, that we're starting to map out the pathway that might be the opposite of the catastrophic mode of being that leads us into pits of hell like Auschwitz. And that there's something genuinely real about it. Like, seriously real. Metaphorically real and literally real. Both at the same time. That the instinct to meaning that you experience, for example, when you listen to something great, that experience of meaning that overcomes you, isn't some epiphenomena. It's not some mere reflection of some more fundamental process, but that which is more fundamental than anything else. Say, well, you can't deny that pain is real and suffering is real, and you can't deny that suffering induced by malevolence is the worst of all possible sufferings. Those are all undeniable as far as I'm concerned. Those are all meanings of life. And they're real enough so that if you encounter them, like if you encounter true malevolence, the probability that you'll walk away from it unscathed is very, very low. It will damage you psychophysiologically, and you might never recover. And that's real enough for me. Well, is the path away from that real? Is the path that transcends that real? Maybe it's more real. That's what I've come to believe, as pessimistic as I am about the nature of humanity, myself included. As real as I believe suffering and evil to be, it appears to me that the mode of being that leads you away from that enables you to bear the suffering with nobility and to be useful to others who are in pain, and to constrain the malevolence in your own heart and around you, that mode of being is more powerful than that which it is set against. And not only that, I think that we experience this. I think we experience it. We just don't notice. Maybe because we're too busy thinking. Because noticing and thinking aren't the same thing. We see in our own lives when we're engaged in something deeply meaningful. Music is the best pathway to that, I think. It's the most it's the most rapid and indisputable pathway to that. Virtually everyone loves music, and music speaks of meaning. It does it directly. It shows you what life would be like if it was ordered and harmonious, and you were dancing along with it properly. It gives you an intimation of psychological integrity. But you watched your lives, day to day, week to week, month to month, you'll notice that there are times when you're so deeply engaged in what you're doing, when what you're doing is so meaningful, in the kind of meaning that announces itself, not the kind that you're creating, that life is so meaningful, you think, this is worth the suffering. Well, you think, well, that's meaning, right? Meaning is what makes the suffering worthwhile. Is that real? It's not something you think up, it's something that you discover. And you can watch, you could see, day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour, week to week. You can see when you're conducting yourself or being conducted in a manner that allows that meaning to reveal itself in a way that in the moment, even if you don't notice, the conditions of your life justify themselves. And that's really saying something, because pain and suffering and malevolence are real. And for something to justify that, it's really something for something to justify that. But when you find that, you find it in art, you find it in literature, you find it in the relationships you have with others, if those relationships are founded on trust and truth. You find it in what you say and do, if what you say and do comes from the heart. You can experience that. The price of experiencing it, I would say, is twofold. You have to take responsibility for being. You have to do that voluntarily, and that means that you have to take responsibility for the suffering of being and accept it and work to ameliorate it. And you have to do that voluntarily, and that's a barrier. I think very frequently that arguments like, well, what difference is it going to make 10 million years in the future, aren't hyper-rational objections to the nature of being itself, but hyper-rationalistic excuses for failing to bear the responsibility of living properly moment to moment and hour to hour. Say you have a child who's sick, maybe one who's been hurt. You say, well, what do you say or do in the face of that? Well, you say, hey, kid, I'm here with you. I'm here beside you. It matters what's happening to you. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to get through this together. And if you're lucky, you get a hug as a consequence of that. And you think, if you don't think that's meaningful, man, there's something wrong with your soul. And answer, what the hell difference is it going to make in 10 million years? That's the devil himself speaking. Oh, that's good enough. So, thank you.